What's up, everybody? It's WWDC21 week. I'm your host, Peter Widham, on the CompileSwift podcast. I'd like to start by apologizing for the audio quality on my voice in this episode. I had a few technical glitches. We're going to be talking with Leo Dion, a friend of mine, and we're going to be looking at the keynote in this episode. And then later on, you will want to switch over and listen to the EmpowerApps episode where we talk about the State of the Union. Hey, Leo, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience for those who don't know who you are?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I'm honored to be on the show. Really love CompileSwift and really glad to be on here. You've been on my show a few times, EmpowerApps.show, and it's really great to be on this special day to talk about just this keynote and this event this year. I've been doing development in the Apple space for about 10 years and love doing development in Swift, not just iPhone, but Mac, Watch, iPad, server side, all that stuff. So, yeah, there's a lot to talk about this year. My brain is swelling with all the data dumped today. So I'm really excited to get these episodes out, and I'm really glad that you're going to be coming on my show to talk about the State of the Union later. So it's going to be fun.
It is, and I'm so glad that you had this idea, because I was thinking to myself, I could sit and talk about, what took place today, but it's so much more fun to discuss it with somebody else. And people probably, I'm certain that listeners and that of CompileSwift and if there were, will know of you because you make one of my applications that I use that I'm always talking about, which is the speculative application, which I just, again, it's like, oh my God, why would you not use this, right? So I'm sure people are familiar with it, but I'll put a link in the show notes. They should definitely check that out.
Thank you. I was hoping that this week I can get in-app purchases in, because I want to start putting it in the store for free and then, do the freemium model. But I've been distracted this week, as you may imagine. So. Oh yeah.
I think it was, I forget. I was talking to someone on a live stream. It was either last night or probably the night before. And we were saying, probably everybody's desperately trying to clear the deck, right? To get everything out this week, focus on WWDC. And then it happens and you're like, well, I wasn't expecting this much, so now I'll try and deal with it. So,
yeah.
Let's go ahead and dive in. So we've got the keynote, to talk about here. And let's just start with general impressions. How did you feel about the keynote this year? And first of all, because you and I have spoken about it before, how do you feel about the format following on from last year with kind of the virtual approach?
Right. I like this format. So I've never been to, have you ever been to WWDC?
No. And in fact, ironically, last year was the first year that I really thought I'm going to try,
same here. Same here.
Happened.
Right. So I like this format. I think it works really well because it's a lot of info and being there live. Like, I like meeting people. I like that. But as far as like actually getting the info and getting it in a decent amount and having these presentations and videos, I know at least last year they were a lot more trimmed and concise. I really like that. So I'm hoping this year it follows that same format, even more refined in a lot of ways. So yeah, I like this.
Yeah, me too. I think, I do miss the opportunity to get to see people and just seeing people gather at the event. But I feel that these videos and the way they do this actually enables me to focus more on what they're telling me, right?
Right.
And because I feel that we don't get all of the marketing stuff at the beginning that you do when it's the live event because there's no journalists there. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
When you think about it, there wasn't a lot about Apple Store sales. There wasn't a lot about, eco-friendliness or diversity. It was all not that thing's bad. It's just they really deep dived into these topics and talking about okay, here's the new features in iOS 15, and it was just like right into it. So yeah, yeah. So just my general thoughts are like the last 2 years there've been like big stuff. Mm-hmm. I feel like this year it's a lot of stuff, but there's no like I didn't think. Well, there is one big thing, which we'll talk about, which we're developer focused. We'll talk about next, but there's nothing like big consumery like this year that's going to affect people. Like 2 years ago it was Swift UI, and last year it was Big Sur and Apple Silicon. And I don't feel like this year had that like big thing, but it had a lot of stuff, certainly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. This year, after I'd seen the keynote and the State of the Union, I was left feeling that it's actually kind of what I was hoping it would be, and if I've got it right, which is it's a progressive year.
Yes.
And it's dialed down on the stuff that's in there, give us some new things, but really take a year to settle in all of the massive features from last year. Now, there's good and there's bad to that because, of course, as developers, every year we expect things that are going to blow our mind in some massive way. And I don't know that we necessarily got that massive thing this year, but I think once we start getting the sessions and diving into the details, we're really going to appreciate things like all the extra APIs that we'll talk about and that kind of thing,
right,
and realize that they really did give us a lot of the under the hood, which is really where it matters for us.
Right. Well, let's get right into it. So they started off iOS 15 like they had like their four main themes, right? Staying connected, finding focus, using intelligence, and exploring the world. And the bulk of staying connected was FaceTime. Like that was it. And I was watching this and I'm like, oh, cool. Spatial audio, voice isolation, like all that stuff that like, I feel like, yeah, I'll see it when I believe it. But like, that's not the reason people don't use FaceTime. The reason people don't use FaceTime is because they're in front of a PC or they're talking to a friend on Android. And then they go, oh yeah, by the way, FaceTime's going to work on Android and Windows. Like I assume like in browser. And I was like, well, that's a feature. Like now I'm going to start using it. We're doing this call here on Zoom. But like, other than like recording, obviously, but like FaceTime, like I could actually do conferences. I can set up links. I could share that. That's a feature. Nobody ever goes, ugh, Zoom sucks. It doesn't have spatial audio. Like that's not a thing, right? Like,
yeah,
like it's nice, but like the stuff with compatibility so that other people can use it. Now the question I have is like, I thought FaceTime is like a layer on top of messages, which I don't think it probably isn't, because why don't they have messages? Well, besides business and marketing reasons, why don't they have messages on Android and Windows if they're doing FaceTime on Android and Windows? That's kind of the question that I had, because technically I would assume that they're kind of both on the same like networking layer or something. I don't know. I probably don't know what I'm talking about here, but does that make sense?
It does, because as you were saying that, I was thinking back and it reminded me, it was either last year or the year before, and I remember there being some talk, like, not just rumors, but serious talk about what I think was iMessage back then, coming to Android. And that's when, I thought, okay, great, that's what we need. So I was surprised when they, pleasantly surprised when they said about FaceTime today. But I thought, they need to do that, because the problem is that the reason I've never used it, and I think I've made like one FaceTime call in the entire existence of it, is because a lot of the time I'm talking with people that are on Android devices. And that's my cat.
Or in front of their PC or something, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. And like you say, so we jump to a third party like, Zoom and things like that. But if if they can give me the features that we love, things like shared clipboards and all that interoperability that we have on the Apple platforms, and now allow me to channel some of that into a FaceTime call, then now we're talking serious contender for something other than just, hey kids, something
Yeah.
like that.
And
It's
I
more of a
like you
business.
can actually do a link to a meeting, kind of like what you could do with Zoom. Like there's a lot going on there that I think is just going to make it a lot more usable to the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it plays a lot into what the theme is this year, at least how it feels, which is, tweaking those for the things for the consumers, pulling back and saying, you know, and I'm sure in the coming days we'll hear people say this. Oh, Apple's just doing a lot of the things that third parties already do, and yes, that's true. But the fact that it'll be integrated into the system means the more people are likely to use it because it'll be there and they will do it that way. Not everybody thinks like a power user or a developer, and you've got third party tools for this, that, and
Right.
everything else. And that's always been the key. It's very interesting, this feeling that Apple's putting in, where that share sheet is becoming so important across so many applications that if
Right.
your app doesn't support that, you're going to be losing a major percentage of the average user, right?
Right. Right. Yep. Yeah, I agree completely. And I think like there's something like wrong. I don't know. There's always the potential about being Sherlocked, right? The idea that like, oh, Apple's gonna write the app that like makes my third party app useless. But I think like if you're going into this space and you're thinking I'm gonna develop this app that could be Sherlocked, like part of being Sherlocked is that your app has more experience in that space and can build more advanced features that Apple like won't build in that caked in like
Yeah,
built-in app that people might use. That's why like I mean I like Overcast. I don't use the podcast app. Like I'm a big fan of Overcast because it has a lot more features than the podcast app. And
yep,
like yeah, so like there's potential there. So you just have to like go into it with the mindset that you have to stay on top of your toes if you're gonna not necessarily like compete with Apple, but build on top of that what Apple provides.
right, right.
That's like getting into the whole App Store competition thing and like, hey, wait, why did they reject my app all of a sudden kind of thing? But still, I think there's a lot of potential there.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me, which may seem a little odd at first, but was when they were saying about, we have this audio isolation, which is great that they can do that, because it seems every time I get on any kind of conference meeting, um, someone outside suddenly decides it's start time to start doing the yard. Right? It's just an inherent thing in nature, apparently.
I'm crossing my
So,
fingers during this recording that doesn't happen.
oh,
Well,
see, so there
hopefully.
you go. So maybe we need to come back in the fall and try it again, right? So that's number one. But something that, it's funny, like now where we're doing this video and that, and I've got a mirrorless camera and a low aperture because, photography, and I know what that does for me and so on. So the other feature that I really like, and I think will save some people at least some embarrassment, is the portrait mode. The fact that we've
Okay.
got that depth on the camera, we've got all of that depth information, and now they can
Right.
use that.
Okay, so it's basically using portrait mode on the iPhone camera so that
Yes,
it can add a bokeh effect, right? Blurs out the
that's how I
background.
understand it. Yes,
Okay. Okay.
yeah.
That makes
Which,
sense. I mean, I'm not
oh,
surprised.
yeah. I mean,
No, I'm curious what iPhone model you need for that or what iPad model. Like, I'd be curious about that because I'm assuming, like, well, one thing I was surprised by the way, I don't know if you've checked this out, but iOS 15 still works on the same devices that iOS 14 does.
oh,
So,
interesting. I
so
haven't
it's
checked the
I
hardware.
put all my money on the iPhone SE first gen not being supported, and it's still supported in iOS 15. So all those designers out there still have to like support that small screen. But like yeah, so I'm like curious does that's like there's no way that's gonna work on an iPhone 6s or an iPhone SE. Like the
Right.
iPhone 7, right, is the first one with dual cameras. So it's like it's probably limited to certain iPhone models, I would assume, right?
Yeah, I'm wondering if they're going to do two modes maybe for that. you'll have the ones that have the hardware support for the really nice, crisp kind of
Right.
outlining. And then maybe they just have a software mode, like an intelligent software mode, something like that.
Right.
Like the one that I'm using on the Zoom now, where it just says, oh, you know what? The stuff back here is not moving.
Right.
Let's blur
Right.
it.
Yeah, that's probably what it is. It's probably like if you have an iPhone 10 and up, you obviously have two dual cameras in front and we can do it. But if you have an older model with only one front facing camera, like there's just no way we could do portrait mode.
Right. Right.
Without like either machine learning or just disabling the feature in general. So yeah.
Yeah. All right. So that's FaceTime. Um, the surprise one that caught me off guard, and almost I need to work with it a bit more to understand it, is this. I don't know if they called it a mode. This focus.
Yes, that was a big deal. Now, like for me, that's an awesome feature that I've been wanting. It's like actually using it that I'm going to be interested in. And obviously, there's some API there for us developers, especially when it comes to notifications, as far as like using it, because like I kind of get the idea, right? There's like, okay, I'm in a meeting. Okay, certain notifications come in. Oh, I'm taking a break. Okay, certain notifications come in. I'm working out. Certain notifications come in. Like that makes sense. Like I kind of get that, and I'm curious from our like Android friends if they have something like that. But like it's actual implementation of it that I'm concerned about, right? Because this stuff sounds great, and then you use it, and it's like, it's okay, but it's a little bit half baked. I think we have to wait till 16 or 17. But no, and like summaries, message statuses, which is very similar to what Slack does, right? Yeah, I mean it's definitely a good step in the right direction as far as notifications are concerned.
Yeah, especially for me over the past, gosh, I would say 3 or 4 months, I have been turning off more and more notifications. And,
Oh yeah.
Part of my problem there is not necessarily the way the system works, but, Apple had this whole thing about, okay, there are some things you can do with notifications, other things we won't allow. But I would say, at least over the last 6 months, more often than not, notifications I get from third-party apps is essentially I would classify as spam. I'm not going to name names, but big box store sends you one, says, hey, there's another deal this weekend.
Yeah.
And it's like,
I mean,
wait a minute.
So as an app developer, notifications are a great way to keep engagement, right? It's just being able to do that. I did a whole episode with Kaya Thomas. Like she knows, I think she does that stuff. She used to do it with Slack, and now she does it with Calm. And like, it's a powerful tool, but it can be misused totally. And I think that's like one of the scary things about notifications. So hopefully, like this focus thing, like I guess when we talk about that State of the Union, like there's a whole scoring system to it and all that stuff. Like you just got to be like very careful with that, and it's like email, right? You don't want to get too spammy with it.
Yeah, and we'll definitely talk about it in more details in the, like you say, our State of the Union overview, and I have some thoughts on that. So we'll sort of leave that one there, because also you don't need me ranting for the next 20 minutes about notifications.
We'll do that. We'll do that in my episode. You can rant all you want. So I like the next big thing that you talked about was intelligence. To me, like the biggest one of those is the live text, like basically OCR stuff. Yep. Like that's awesome. Like I remember 10 years ago playing around with Word Lens. You know what I'm talking about? Word Lens.
I remember playing around with something. I don't remember what it was called.
It was an AR thing, and then Google bought them, and it's basically like translates text as you bring your phone up to camera to it. Like this is 10 years ago, right? But now you could like take whiteboard notes and like put it in your notes app and like copy the text.
Oh,
like, that to
okay.
me, that is AR like at its finest. Like that is what AR is supposed to be doing. And yeah, I really like that. That's going to be super useful, assuming it works perfectly. And I bet it does. I bet it probably works pretty darn well. It's been around for a while. But that's really cool to see natively in iOS.
It is huge, I think, because the first thing I thought of was the amount of documents that I take pictures of so that I can store the document away somewhere, but I can
Right.
call it up
Yeah.
if I want. So, and there are third-party apps that, yeah, you can do it and it'll scan it. But again, the fact that it's there in the system and I don't need another app for it, and I can just put it in notes or send it to wherever I want, and it's searchable, fantastic. I mean, yes, others have done it, but the fact that Apple's now doing it with notes, I feel over the last couple of releases, notes has become a very serious contender for data management, as opposed to, I'm just going to write the shopping list down quickly.
What do you use for your notes mostly?
So what I do, I have kind of a convoluted system for something, but that we'll talk about later with Mac OS. But
Okay.
I use Devon Think. I have Devon Think, and everything goes in there. But I've always felt that it looks, and I apologize to the Devon Think developers. It's a fantastic app that has an interface designed by engineers. And so, trying to go in and find something quickly, it's just not a thing that's going to happen. But as far as putting stuff in there and their search and the OCR as well, just works beautifully. But it's way more than you need on a daily note-taking app.
I've definitely heard of Devon Think.
And also at this point, it's that thing of kind of the lock-in. I've got so much data in there that the thought of taking it out and putting it somewhere else is just not going to happen.
Yeah, tell that to Evernote users.
Yeah.
Like, so I use Bear. I love Bear. It's super simple. A lot of people are not happy because there isn't a ton of features in it, but I'll say it does what I want. I just want simplicity and something that works on all the platforms.
I used Bear for a while because I liked being able to do the very quick markdown.
Yes, yeah. I'm a big fan of Markdown for everything. But then like going back to compatibility issues, like I end up using Google Docs like we're doing right now for this episode, and because it works for everybody and like it just works and it's compatible. So yeah, I totally understand.
Yeah. It's all about, and actually that's the other key thing here, especially I think it's only on the iPad version of iPad OS 15, is the now globally accessible note-taking, call it an inbox, whatever you want to call it, but the fact that I can just quickly create
quick
a note.
Notes? Quick Notes or whatever they called it.
Quick Notes, that was it. Yeah. So the fact that that's there now means that I can turn around and say, okay, I can try this again,
Was there anything else on the iPhone you wanted to talk about?
One feature that I'm thinking really applies to the iPhone more than anything would be the changes to Wallet, just because I don't think I ever used it on my iPad, even though it's there. But one thing I've always kind of said is Wallet's great, but I still got to carry cards and things around with me, my driver's ID and all those kind of stuff. It doesn't do away with conventional wallets, right? Or purses.
So do you think Texas is going to have driver's licenses and
well,
Apple Wallet?
That's the catch, because that's what I caught was, at first I was like, hooray, it's going to take my driver's ID. And then they said in qualifying states.
Because it's up to the states to decide, right?
Exactly. And so then I thought, okay, I know how this is going to play out. I'm still stuck with it.
We're not going to let Apple have our driver's license. Heck no.
Yeah.
Privacy. Yeah, I'm afraid of that too. I have a wallet case, so I have like my 2 cards that I use all the time, and I'm good enough. I am impressed by how much like Apple Pay has been taken, especially in the last year, and I love Apple Pay. So I don't know. I think give it anywhere, depending on what state, it could take anywhere between a year to like 5 years. But I think it's going to be headed in that direction, whether they like it or not. So
yeah, it has.
I'm still surprised at how much I can do online with my state. So. it'll happen. It's going to go in that direction. Before we jump onto iPad, one thing I did want to mention, and I was playing around with the developer app. We do know what happened with Build Buddy, which we'll get into much later, but we don't know what happened with Dark Sky, which I was really surprised. Like, and I'm looking through I'm looking through the developer app, and I don't see anything about weather APIs or weather API presentations unless they've somehow put it in something else.
Yeah,
because they definitely revealed like all this crazy map stuff with like precipitation numbers and all that, but nothing about like new APIs with weather. So I'm really curious what the deal with that is. If that's maybe like people were like really disappointed in Build Buddy not going anywhere, which obviously we know it did. But like we I assume maybe like next year we might get a decent weather API for iOS. I don't know. But anyway, I just wanted to bring that up because I was kind of expecting something, but I guess it's kind of too soon. Whatever, 6 months or whatever it's been since I bought Dark Sky. So
yeah. But it is an interesting gap, though, like you say, especially in a year where they're saying about all of these APIs. But then if I think about it like Apple does sometimes, is okay, we got the most awesome weather app now. And so we want you to use ours, not use somebody else's or all this amazing data that we have. So we won't give you public APIs to do it. And you'll have to use kind of the Apple's weather / dark skies, which is perfectly fine. I love the weather app. But it is an interesting gap.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah, for APIs, it is an interesting gap, right? Sometimes that not giving it to you tells you more than when they give you these APIs, right?
Right. Yeah. I think, I kind of think with like, with a lot of these, what do you call it? Like, acquisitions, where Apple buys somebody and then they bring the API in. I think the shortcuts / workflow thing is kind of an exception because that was fairly quick. That was like 6 months or 9 months. And then the next thing we know, we had a shortcuts app, right? But I think with something like Build Buddy, I think that's a lot more of the norm where it's kind of going to take a while for them to like, okay, we're going to give you a weather app. And then next year it's like, by the way, you can build weather extensions or whatever it is. You can have weather emojis, whatever it's going to be in 2022. And,
you know what?
Yeah.
That's your next app right there. A weather emoji. I love
weather
that.
emojis. Yeah. A cloud with faces. I like that. Yeah.
I would totally like, so that way, because the amount of time someone says, what's the weather like? If I can one click answer that question, I'm buying your app right there. Because I'm tired. It's slightly stormy, getting dark with wind coming in from the south. If I can 3 emoji that, I'm buying it. Yeah.
So I think going into this year, like to me, the big thing I was expecting was big iPad changes.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of think we got that. I will find out after we're done talking because I'm just finished installing iOS 15 on my iPad.
Okay.
But it seemed like a lot more subtle. It was like, this is groundbreaking. Like, this is going to change everything. It's like, by the way, we added a little bar to the top. So now you actually know what the heck is going on when you want to have 2 apps on the screen. Because that's like the biggest problem with the iPad. We talk about multitasking. Some people are like, oh, I want Mac OS on the iPad. Please don't do that. And then it's like, no, we're going to make a small step here. Let's just introduce a little bar at the top so you know how to drag things around. I assume that's going to be the case. I'll find out in a little bit. I don't know. That's my general impression with the iPad because like the reason I was expecting this is we got M1 on the iPad Pro. I'm like, okay, now like they're going to have to really make it worthwhile because I like my MacBook Air with my M1 and I don't know why I'd ever want to buy an iPad Pro when my Mac can do more than that. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, so there's one thing that will sort of dangle the carrot and everyone's going to have to tune in for the State of the Union one when we deep dive into it about what changes have happened and what may or may not be taking advantage of the M1. But I will say that the multitasking on the iPad, this new system, from the brief amount of information we have right now, feels better because I almost, I use my iPad most of the time with, the the super expensive keyboard with the touchpad because
what kind of iPad do you have?
I have the iPad 12 Pro. So this is the last year's model. I don't have the new M1. And that's something we'll talk about because I really don't know. But so I've got last year's one. And when I put that sort of docket into the keyboard with the touchpad, it feels a lot more computer-like, except for the multitasking. But I think these multitasking changes, if they work like the way they feel they're going to, feel very comfortable with a little tap pad, plus the on-screen controls, because I'll be doing like I am on my Mac. I won't be leaving the keyboard. Now, the question with it is, though, I'm still at the end of the day left with the possibility of, 3 apps, right? A side-by-side plus my overlay. And for serious power users, I always, I do that for a little bit and then I'm going back to my Mac, right?
Yeah. Like there's this whole idea of like a shelf. Like I'm really curious about that. If you can like drag. So like on the Mac, you have the dock at the bottom and I can like drag a document to an app and it like knows what to do. Is that like what they're talking about? Well, so just like, I'll just say on my brief playing around with iOS 15 on the iPad, I do so they add like an ellipsis to the top of every app. And from there you can like tap on it and say split screen, not split screen, or drag it wherever you want. Which I think is like a good step towards like figuring out how to arrange windows. And so like, do they have more than that where they have like the shelf or dock where you can like drag stuff to other apps? Because that's to me like the biggest problem is like the copy paste and like dragging files over. Like drag and drop was like great, but it wasn't enough for what people do.
Right. And I don't know that it really helps with the drag and drop, other than you can drag and drop between what you've got on the screen. It will be interesting if, like you say, even something as simple as if I select some text, drag it down to one of those little, windows on the dock, does it multitask me over and then I can drop it? Because if it does, fantastic.
Right.
But so what I understand, and this is the interesting part here, is that bar across the bottom from what I've seen is essentially thumbnails of each of my views, right? So let's say I've got 2 split views, right? So I've got a notepad, email, and in another one I've got a web browser and a Word document or something, that I would get 2 at the bottom and I can tap one. So instead of doing that 4-finger swipe, it just switches between them for me, which if that's all that doesn't really feel all that helpful. Now, the one thing I did like, though, I assume the current iOS doesn't do it because I've never tried to do it because it would be awesome if it did, is when you're in that exposed mode, where you swipe up to see all the apps, you can drag one app icon onto another one, and that essentially tells it, make this a split view with the 2.
Oh, okay.
So that's fantastic because the amount of times I've got one app open and then I'm like, oh, I got to go find the other one. And at the moment, if it's not on that dock at the bottom, well, I can't drag it up and then release it. So that will be interesting. That's a test you should play around with. That would really help the multitasking. But I feel as whilst we're constrained to this view system of this 1 or 2 views, I'm never going to be able to really multitask like I do on a normal machine.
And there's no command line.
Sorry, say again?
Like, that's the other thing. There's no command line. Like, I do a lot. I'm surprised at how much I do on the command line to do stuff.
Yeah.
But I don't agree when people say, oh, I wish we brought Mac OS to the iPad. Like, I don't want that either. Like, I like the iPad for what it is. Like, I'd like the simplicity of it. And I don't know. I'm not paid enough to figure out, okay, how do I design this UI for iPad OS so it's simple but powerful? And like it's really an OS built for like iPhones. Like that's the other issue, right? So it's like, how do I slowly make that incremental step in iPad OS to where it's like not quite as useful as macOS, but like 80% of the way there. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And keep it secure and stuff.
I think that like last year and then the stuff they showed us this year, iPad OS is definitely moving in the right direction. What I'm now starting to wonder is when you think about this multitasking with the two windows now, are we going to see the opposite? And are we going to see things like this, being able to click something, get the window? Maybe that's going to go more towards the going on the Mac as opposed to the Mac going on the iPad. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Because I use
totally, especially with Big Sur, right?
Yeah, because I use a third-party app with some keyboard shortcuts to sort of, do that thing with the windows and position them.
Right.
But if I, and I know that on Big Sur, you've got that little one where I think, let me check here. I think it's, you hover over the green and you can do the left and right and that. So it feels like maybe it's more going in the other direction. But I think at the end of the day, what it comes down to and what I've come to accept is, the iPad probably will never end up being a quote unquote Mac-like machine and vice versa.
Right.
And you're either one or the other, or you're both. But you're not going to have that perfect union, at least anytime soon. But I'm also okay with that because part of the reason I say that is when I thought about replacing my my iPad this year because of the M1, when I stopped and rationally thought about it, I thought, you know what? I could get an awful lot more done and for a lot less money if I got a MacBook Air instead.
Right.
And I can't stop thinking about it that way,
Right.
And it's the apps that are the problem. Not that the iPad apps are a problem. They do their thing beautifully. But I'm also old school, and as a power user, I'm used to a million windows, and I'm never going to escape.
I'm curious if it's going to be a generational thing, too. Like, is somebody who's 20 years younger than us going to be like, oh, yeah, I can do everything I want with an iPad. I can't believe people use punch cards and, like had to roll tape and do all this stuff and, load 8x asterisk 81 or whatever when they wanted to, run a program. It's like... So, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see because there's certain things like as power users that we kind of want that haven't gone away, like keyboards or command lines and things like that. So, I don't know.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see.
I think you're right, though, because part of, you sort of hit the nail on the head there. When you think about a lot of the features for all of the platforms this year, they feel, I was thinking to myself, they feel very much like they're for the current generation and not really for my generation because it's more, and I don't want to underplay what the importance of them, but they're a bit more sort of foo-foo-y than actual huge benefits production wise, I
feel like it was less this year than it usually is.
You think so?
So that's funny you think that. Yeah. I feel like you have your Clips app, or you'll have all these message extensions that feel very much like, oh, we saw it in Snapchat, so let's just copy it. I feel like there was less of that this year. If anything, I feel like the thing they leaned on is privacy for good obvious reasons.
Yes.
And I feel like that's kind of what they really lean into to kind of talk about, which I guess we can get into if you want to, but
sure.
The whole mail thing.
The
fact that you can... I run a mailing list, right? I email people through MailChimp and I kind of have trust those numbers because of especially if my audience is developers, they know how to remove that stuff. But now it's even more people are going to be able to remove that tracking stuff in their mail app. So it'll be interesting to see. And then the other thing was, we can jump ahead a little bit, but Siri, so Siri never leaves the device, which I had originally thought until we found out it didn't, through a leak or whatever. But not only that, but now Siri can be on third-party devices.
Yeah.
You saw that, right?
Yeah.
And that's going to be interesting
because, at first, kind of the humorous sort of dry English humor in me said, yeah, Siri on the device. That's probably why it's so bad. It needs a bigger computer behind it, right? But then as I thought about it, and opening it up for third party, but staying on the device, I thought, yeah, that's the perfect privacy way to do this and still take advantage of it. And Siri, more often than not works good for me, but there are those days when it's like, okay, Siri, one of us may have had a couple of drinks last night, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't me.
Right.
But opening it up to third party is definitely going to be it. It was a shot across the bow this year for those companies who deal in selling the data, right? Let's call it what it is, because you're quite right about like even the MAL with the hidden pixel or whatever it was they call it that we all know about.
Right.
Same thing, right? I have a MailChimp list for CompileSwift, and not that I obsess about the numbers, but it's always nice to know, like, okay, majority of people opened it. Well, if you don't know that people are even opening it from a business standpoint, you've got to look at it and say, okay, I don't know anymore. And if nobody gets back to me, should I be spending the X amount of hours this week that I spent on?
Right. I kind of like, that's why I don't like getting into marketing, but like, that's why I kind of half trust them. It's like, I don't care so much if people may or may not open or read it. It's the engagement part. And if I'm not getting that, then that's really where the problem is. And that's all a long-term thing. Right. Yeah. So like sometimes I feel like those numbers are more used for people to justify their jobs than there are to like really help like grow your business. So yeah, I'm a little bit like, it's not the end of the world for me because of this.
Right.
And it's just something I have to take in because I've seen a lot of people who are like, yeah, I don't even use MailChimp anymore because it's not worth it for me to like have all this tracking stuff. Like, I just want to email my folks and let them know what's going on. And like, great. That's it. That's what's important. It's not about like, oh, did I have to A/B test my, my subject line and all that junk that I don't think is necessarily worth your time until you get really, really big enough.
Yeah. I wish, I think like sometimes I think like with all the stuff that I do sort of which all of my stuff is on the side is, I wish it was big enough that somehow I would, these would be important numbers for me. I'm always happy when it's like, great, one person did something fantastic, It's kind of like the podcast downloads, right? You never know. It's like, but if 100 people download it, does that mean 100 people listen to it? No, we know it doesn't.
Right. Right. It's just a rough guesstimate. Yeah.
And it's interesting. Another carrot to dangle for people when we get to the State of the Union and talking about the App Store about the A/B testing.
That's awesome. Yeah. That is really cool.
That's a massive, that was one of the things that I thought, whoa, that's a massive thing this
year. Yeah. Cause, I've talked to Ariel Michelli from AppFigures, like, how do you A/B test that stuff? And like, they're like, oh, you set up, there's like web pages you can set up where it kind of like creates what looks like on the actual App Store. But now you can actually do A/B testing on the App Store. And to me, that's like super powerful because that's something I've always wanted is to test that stuff out.
Yeah. I just hope that it doesn't break, the App Connect, because some days that thing is very fragile, even with what it has now. Right.
Yeah. Yep. Totally. So speaking of privacy, you want to talk about iCloud Plus?
This confuses me a little bit because I liked what I heard, but I was left confused by the fact that they said, well, it won't cost any more than it does now while you're using iCloud Plus. And I was like, well, wait a minute. I'm using iCloud, but not iCloud Plus. So unless you're going to give me iCloud Plus for free, it's going to cost me something.
Right.
And with Apple, it's going to cost me something,
Right. You think it's like you think it's a service you pay on top of? You think
it's like part of the subscription for that Apple One or whatever they call it.
Yeah. So I got Apple One this year because we're just using so much stuff. It was like worth it for me. Is it a VPN? Like, is that basically what it is?
Feels like it, doesn't it? because they're saying about it goes through two different, quote, servers.
Right.
And I was like, yeah, it sure feels like a VPN. And then there was, because at first I thought, okay, but someone's still seeing that data. And then they did say we can't figure out the data. And I was like,
right.
Okay, I believe you, but
right.
I'm still, whether I'm using my existing VPN with somebody else or something, and now I'm going to be using this one. And then I thought the next logical thing was, well, what if I've got a company VPN? I'm going to have to make sure I'm not on this other one because you can never use two VPNs successfully,
Right, right.
But that is, to me, they're saying VPN without saying VPN, if I understand it.
Yeah. And this, it's an interesting trend this year where, like, I think, was the first time you were on my show, I talked about how, like, Apple's into services. Well, it's like now they're, like, doing more, like, actual IT services this year. Including the other thing we'll talk about in the State of the Union. But like this too feels like another like services thing that's like more IT related and not just, hey, look, we have Foundation from Isaac Asimov. It's like it's like actual services, kind of like what Amazon does. Speaking of which, I have Echo Beat, just like what they showed off.
Okay.
The kids love talking to Alexa on that thing.
Right.
I will see how they like talking to Siri on that thing, because it's a pretty strong competitor to the brand new HomePod Mini I bought last year. So now we'll have two Siri devices in the living room. So that'll be really interesting because it definitely looks like they really are doing like actual services and not just buying a bunch of Hollywood movies and stuff like that,
Yeah, it's funny you say it because, I was thinking to myself, maybe when Apple altered its name, and they said, well, we're more than a computing company anymore. And I'm thinking, well, you're sure increasing the amount of computing things that you're offering. Maybe you're a little too early.
So, I don't have a lot to say about health and watchOS. I'm a big fan of watchOS. It did not feel like a watchOS year, and it has not been a watchOS year for quite a while.
I feel like I'm going to anger some people by saying it, but it was a very quiet watchOS year. But let's be honest, until they can make big leaps in what the hardware can do, whatever that may be, there's not really so far for them to go because they're limited by what they can offer on it. And that's not to say that the things that they're putting on there aren't important, but like, for example, myself being, diabetic, the next one, the first one that comes out that can read my blood glucose, buying it, end of story. But until they can make the hardware for that, there's not going to be the
and they get the approval. Let's not forget that.
Yes, yep. So, the watchOS this year, it's more of a hey, we keep continuing to tweak things almost, and this is part of Apple's situation, I think, now is even when you don't have something, you got to release a new version of every platform every year because you kind of set yourself up that way.
Yeah. But one thing I do want to mention, certain operating system was not mentioned at all at the keynote, as far as I had heard. tvOS was not mentioned at all.
It's funny you mentioned that. As I'm looking at the notes, and I was, when I was rewatching the keynote, I thought I missed something because
Okay, so there's let me just look. I'm just looking at the developer app. There is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Just like only 4 videos for tvOS. 4 to 8 videos. Like it's not a lot. And I feel like they kind of blew it. Like they not blew it all. They like did everything with the new Apple TV a couple of months ago. And like that was the big thing. And then now it's like, okay, just keep watching your movies. There's not going to be a lot of big stuff out of tvOS. So say what you will about watchOS. tvOS is definitely not a tvOS
right
until they turn it into a gaming console. So
well, I was going to say what that suggests to me is, hey, next, we're working on something. and
Yeah,
then next year it's
that's
going
true
to be the
too.
thing. Yeah.
So let's talk about Mac OS.
All right.
What's your thoughts on Mac OS
So
Monterey? Which, by the way, I made the big mistake. Why I was late was because I was installing Mac OS Monterey.
you couldn't resist, could
So
you?
no, I couldn't resist. I have my SSD I use for video editing, and I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna install it on there. How long is it gonna take? So yeah,
That's what this one is right here. Last year, this little SSD.
yeah, that's a great model. That's a great model. Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't have the same one.
This was Big Sur until the release last year. So this year it's going to be Monterey.
Yeah. So I think I horked my iCloud account. But anyways, nobody's perfect. So what's your thoughts on Monterey?
I feel, Mac OS is mature for the most part. And, whilst it doesn't feel like a big year this year,
I mean, last year was huge. It's the first time they went from 10 to 11. Like, that's that in 20 years.
As I've said before, is I don't want a huge year every year. I want a huge year,
right.
Bug fix, so on and so on.
Right.
But that said, the one thing that we got, which is going to make me happy and give me an excuse to dive into it more, shortcuts on the Mac. Because I use it on my iPad, I struggle with it. I was a workflow user, but I struggle with it not because it's limited in what it can do or things like that, but because I can only do so many things on the iPad with it. And then when I go back to my Mac, like for example, every time I ship a episode of the podcast, I use Zapier to do all the things I need it to do.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So now if I can translate that into the Shortcuts app, even silly things like I use Keyboard Maestro. And so when I'm doing like setting up for a podcast, I have a shortcut that I run, a keyboard shortcut, and it opens up all the apps that I need and lays them out and things like that. Well, it's like I could do this with Automator. I could do it with AppleScript, but I don't want to have to hassle with it. But now that I can write a shortcut on either platform, or even better, write it on my Mac and then move it over to my iPad, for me, that's huge. The ability to do that. I feel sad, though, because, we've had Automator forever, and it's so, so beloved by so many people. And they clearly said this year, as plain as day, they said it, shortcuts is the future of automation.
I think the writing's been on the wall for quite a while as far as Automator is concerned. And I say that because somebody who's built an app using Automator, it's like the support from Apple has been like pretty dismal. And so I think shortcuts on the Mac is pretty much like, I was just kind of waiting for it because you knew that they were going to bring something to the Mac that would replace Automator. And I'm not surprised at all by this. Yep. And what I'm curious about is like, is there an API for it? Like kind of like AppleScript where you can just like, can you build stuff around it and like talk to other apps? Cause that would be the thing for me is like, whether
and it also for me,
cause I guess it would that be through SiriKit? Is that how that works? I'm just trying to,
because they always talk about it through Siri, but I don't feel it should be so connected that it can operate independently. But
I think like SiriKit, is where you set up shortcuts in your app. I believe that's the case.
Well, that's where you can have the triggers. But as far as actually creating them, that would be the separate shortcuts app. And they badly named, given both of them the same name, just was a mistake. But the other part here too is the right in line with what you're saying is, okay, but what about the sandbox, right? Because we're used to on the Mac having a bit more of a free sandbox, but also with the documentation, this will be interesting how you're saying about whether I can tap into the APIs in there. I'm hoping there will also be something that says, hey, you're my Mac app. I can expose APIs to shortcuts and bring it in that way. right? Like I can think of a few examples. I have my own blogging application that I wrote that just kicks out a markdown document at the end of it. But if I could be operating in other things in Mac OS and then send it to my app via a shortcut or something like that, that would be fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, no, totally. I agree completely. Yeah, I don't see any like API for the Mac as far as like
I think that
which is unfortunate.
They're being a bit cagey, maybe. You know, when sometimes it's like, maybe it's too early and they haven't really figured out what they want to do with it yet.
Right.
But what do you think of Mac OS this year?
So I like that. I think that's cool. And then the other thing I like is universal control. I've been using Sidecar a ton, but it would be cool to try out universal control as an alternative, essentially, because I do think like there's things that I would do more on iPad OS, because all I really use it like the extra screen for is the browser and stuff. But it's cool. It's very cool, and I'm gonna be curious to try that out once I put Monterey on my iPad or my MacBook Air. So yeah, I don't know that. And I'm glad, like you said, I'm glad it's not a big thing, because just fix the bugs, please. Just fix the bugs so it works smoothly and things don't crash. That's all I care about. Yeah.
When they were showing, this universal control, and they put the iPad next to the computer, and immediately I was thinking, okay, this doesn't feel any different than the Sidecar and the way we do it now. But then when they had the 3 and they dragged, assuming that it works like they say, and they dragged from the iPad through, quote unquote, through a Mac to another Mac, that's when I thought, all right, that's a little more special,
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Did you want to talk about another old man Peter thing, or maybe you want to bring it up on my podcast app library on the iPad?
Yeah, the app library, that... I think shall I get my ranting out of the way here, and then we'll leave it at that, right? So app library.
You don't like the app library?
I do not like the app library. I didn't like it when I first saw the demo last year. Don't like it now. And I think what it is, when I'm swiping across on my iPhone, right? Especially when I'm in the car or something like that, the way I do it on my iPhone is, and we'll talk about some of this in the State of the Union too. I have a page of widgets and then 2 pages of apps. So I know that if I just keep swiping all the way across, that on the last tab is like the Apple apps for system, time, the settings, all that kind of stuff. Well, it's so easy to go one extra, and I've got the app library, and I've never, ever used the app library, and I just want to turn that thing off. To me, it's like the dashboard that we used to have on the Mac for those of us that ever lived through that.
Oh, come on. It's not that bad.
Well, it's not that bad. No. But I just don't want it. If
I like the app library because I like a place to dump apps that I want to use, but I don't want to show.
I like the idea of it. Yes, I definitely like the idea of I want this.
And app. I never go to the app library. Like I go to a Spotlight, I search for the app. Exactly. I never go to the app library. But like if that means that there's a place to dump apps that I don't want to see, but apps that I want to hide, then I'm fine with it, I guess. Because I hardly ever go to the app library.
Well, no, see, I only go there when I go there by mistake. So when they said it was on the iPad, I'm like, oh, geez.
Yeah.
So we'll see. And it's a silly little thing, but it's just that thing of when I'm in a hurry or something, or I'm not looking at the screen, I know if I just keep swiping to the end, I'm going to get to my last screen. Well, now I'm not going to do that. I'm going to end up with the app library, and I'll have to go back one, and it's a silly thing. I know it is. It's old man Peter, but it's just one of those things of, I've never used this. I don't want it. Let me turn it off. I always find things through Spotlight. No other way. Please just let me turn it off. So I'm good. There you go. So we've got a lot in this episode for the keynote, but there's always a lot to talk about with Apple. Leo, thank you so much for being the first guest on CompileSwift. It truly has been an honor and a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, you are most welcome. So, for CompileSwift users, what you're going to want to do now is to really deep dive into a lot of the things that we've spoken about here. You're going to want to jump over to Leo's podcast, where we're going to talk about the State of the Union. So, Leo, tell them how they can find the podcast.
I will give you the link for EmpowerApps.show is the URL to the podcast, and I will post a link in the show notes to our episode, which will should hopefully be released pretty soon, if not already by the time we've published this. So, yep.
All right, sounds great. Well, thank you, everybody. We will see you in the next one. It's the beginning of what I'm certain is going to be a very busy week. That's it. So we'll see you in the State of the Union on Empower Apps. And I'll speak to you next week. Take care of yourselves. Hope that code compiles swiftly. All right.
I'm gonna end the audio recording.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm gonna stop the recording here, and then we'll start another one. And it gives me a chance to just go back, check that one just quickly. Yeah, as I was watching the State of the